Mr Speaker, a program to rebuild this nation's economy. I certainly support that statement by the Prime Minister. To continue strengthening our economy and achieve better results from the public services that New Zealanders rely on. That's essential because after 9 years of a Labor government, New Zealanders are up to their eyeballs in debt. Whichever way you look at it, Labor's social agenda failed this country miserably. The only achievement Labor can celebrate is being the government of the first country in the OECD to go into recession in 2007. The only achievement that Labor can celebrate is being the government that took the first country within the OECD into recession in 2007. Labor grew a bloated state sector with their agenda of creating a nation totally dependent on the state for survival. Fortunately, history will show they have failed. Mr Speaker, that is why the Prime Minister's statement about rebuilding this nation is so important and so appropriate. This government is determined to rebuild this country's confidence for investment and develop the conditions for more enduring and resilient, better-paying jobs. We are living in the region in the world that is the fastest growing. This nation has a comparative advantage by virtue of our climate, which makes us the envy of other nations. The government's economic plan is about ensuring New Zealand maximises these opportunities. And I make that point, Mr Speaker. The government's economic plan is about ensuring New Zealand maximises these opportunities. This government is having to rebuild at the same time as well as rebalance our economy because priorities have got out of hand during Labor's wasteful 9 years in the Treasury benches. Just consider this one fact. 60% of all new jobs created since 2004 were in the heavily government-dominated sector. 60% growing government that has a drag effect and shuts out private investment. Mr Speaker, 2011 will be marked with further rebuilding of this country's export base, and we need to sell more of what we are best at producing and sell it at higher prices in order to pay down the debt that we've built up over the last decade under Labor. For far too long, this country's export sector has stagnated while the previous government focused on policies of self-gratification that resulted in consumption and wasteful spending. Let's have a closer look at a couple of the areas where this government will create opportunities to rebuild the country's economy and take a lead on the front foot and strengthen the exporting sector. Colleagues, do you remember those fantastic days last year when we were debating in the House here the Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioners and Improved Water Management Bill, which is now an act? About 12 months ago, this government took the decisive action to remove the ECAM councillors and replace them with a team of commissioners under the leadership of Dame Margaret Baisley. Such a challenge was far too big a step for any feeble Labor government. These opportunities were totally ignored under the Labor's watch, and they effectively wasted the very best economic times in New Zealand for 30 years. And when you consider the abundance of surpluses that existed during that time, there was an ability to invest in capital investment. The ambitious project that we're talking about will require all the skill and all the wisdom that this country can muster, but the rewards are there. It will create thousands of jobs and it will contribute up to $1.7 billion annually to our nation's economy. That is an example of what the Prime Minister was referring to when he spoke of rebuilding this nation's economy and future-proofing it. And all Labor could do while that was happening was attempt to sabotage it. The Canterbury Water Management Strategy. So how is it doing, Mr Speaker? I'm pleased to report to Parliament that progress is being made at a good rate. Solutions are being worked on collectively on what's proved to be a 20-year impasse. We're making speedy progress. Down on the bottom end of the electorate, the Hurunui Water Zone Group has been working well together. Minister Nick Smith has approved moratoriums on water takes on both the Hurunui and the Waiau catchments. Fish and Game and Rafting New Zealand has withdrawn their appeal for a water conservation order over the Hurunui. A collegial approach rather than an adversarial approach is making progress. Clear leadership from this government has put all stakeholders into the room and effectively said, sort it out, or you'll force us to make the decisions for you. This is the rebuilding that is going on in New Zealand as we speak at this moment, Mr. Speaker. This is the rebuilding that New Zealand needs. Investment opportunities like these will require money. Money that as a nation we can't keep borrowing from overseas for any number of reasons, as my colleagues have expressed over the last few days. But what a wonderful opportunity this represents for a number of our major institutions in New Zealand, for iwi or for the 1.6 million mainly young Kiwi savers to play their part in rebuilding our nation's economic future. What an exciting opportunity that the partial sell-down of minority shareholdings of identified SOEs presents, with clear, measurable economic gains to the country, building a stronger and broader investment base for our nation. Moving on to the second item I want to refer to, Mr. Speaker, aquaculture, another area where government needs to take a lead in rebuilding the primary sector. Aquaculture is a sector that under Labor became so bogged down by red tape and layer upon layer of bureaucracy, so much so that there was not one new aquaculture management area set up under Labor's 2004 Aquaculture Act. This is a sector that certainly needs rebuilding and is potentially job-rich. Government needs to provide certainty for it to reach its own goal of contributing $1 billion to the nation's economy in 2025. It needs a government that can produce legislation that encourages investment free from ambiguity, clarity around undue adverse effects to other commercial fishing operations, the ability to change to high-value species where research supports such changes, providing research and development to refine and improve commercial yields and species development, and a government that can engage positively and fruitfully with Māori from the beginning of the process. Mr. Speaker, these are just two projects that represent a whole raft of projects that are happening that will create thousands of jobs that are both resilient and production-based. Rather than borrow and hope like wasteful labour, this government has a plan for real jobs that will rebuild the exporting base and this country's on its natural advantage. One that can never be forgotten, that a sector that is so important that Labor neglected it for 9 years. Only by such essential infrastructure development will this country realise its potential. The Prime Minister in his statement articulated the very plain thoughts of how to rebuild this country and its economy. I can't wait until the election, Mr. Speaker, where we can debate the wastefulness of the last Labor government and compare that with the John Key National-led government as to who are the best financial managers and rebuilders of this country's economy. So in conclusion, may I make the statement, remember this fact: if you want a first-class education, if you want a first-class health service, if you want a first-class police force so that you feel safe in your bed at night, you need a first-class economy. I totally support the Prime Minister's statement on rebuilding this country's confidence in itself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.